Hello there, and welcome to Lobby for Your Policy with the Ontario Young Liberals. It's me again, your Policy Director, Tanya Kuzman. So follow me and we'll move on to the next slide. Okay, so we've moved on to the next slide and it's entitled, What is Lobbying? So any fundamental video that's going to be instructional with respect to how to lobby is obviously going to talk about what this term actually means. We hear it a lot, we use it a lot, and it appears quite a bit in our literature, but what actually is it? So essentially, lobbying is an individual or a group of people who are conducting a campaign to influence people of an organization, and most of the time we hear it in the context of the legislature, the House of Commons, with the end goal of getting members of the legislature or an organization to vote in the group's interest. So lobbying can manifest in a myriad of ways, and in subsequent slides we will address some of the various key strategies to lobby for your policy in the context of an Ontario Young Liberal Summer Fling or biennial. What's key to take away from this slide, folks, is that what we're really doing when we're lobbying is convincing people. We are working to convince people that our policy idea is worth supporting. You're trying to convince them that it's a policy that has a future, that it's a policy that's implementable, that it's a policy that's likely rather progressive and a new idea. It's something that is worth their while to stand behind. That's what you're doing when you're lobbying, with obviously the end goal of securing votes on the big ballot day. For me, it's always been helpful to envision a policy as the candidate. We all know what it's like to work on an election, and what you're doing is selling folks at the door on your man or woman running to be that MP or MPP. Well, consider your policy the candidate in the lead up to Summer Fling, and you want to sell people on that policy and you want those votes, and it's up to you to ensure that they believe if they vote for your policy, their vote's going somewhere, that it's going to benefit them, that it's going to benefit the party. And that's what is important to keep in mind moving forward. Okay, so that brings us to the end of this slide, and we're going to move on now to the next one, which will cover how to lobby. How do we actually engage in this process? So follow me, let's go. All right, so here we are talking about how to lobby. And you'll see along the side of the slide here, I've got a few key terms which I'm going to elaborate on in a little bit of depth. People, messaging, media, merchandise, teamwork, website, and whip. When I talk about people, what I'm referring to are the folks who attended your regional policy parliament and all the folks who attended all the other regional policy parliaments. That's where you want to start. You want to be making connections with people who you know are going to be at Summer Fling, who you know have a vested interest in the results of Summer Fling. Those are the people you want to be connecting with. The other key people to make connections with are presidents of riding and campus clubs, because even if those folks are not necessarily going to be present at Summer Fling, it's most certain that they know people who will be. And if you establish a connection there, there is a good shot at ensuring that that personal relationship goes a long way when it comes to garnering support for your ideas. Now, just to be clear, when I talk about making connections with people, what I'm referring to is actually reaching out to them. Send them an email, find them on Facebook, have a conversation with them. If at all possible, meet up with some of your key contacts in person. And during that time, your goal is to, as I mentioned earlier, sell them on your policy. Ensure that your passion for this idea is shining through and give them reasons why they should stand behind it. That's what it really means to connect with people. And the other thing you'll want to do is ensure that each time you meet with somebody or connect with them in some capacity, that you are doing the best that you can to obtain yet another contact from that person. The chain of lobbying is built connection by connection, especially if you're just starting out, but that doesn't mean that you can't be successful. Use your contacts strategically and make sure that you've obtained all the information you can from each person you speak to. Remain genuine and do your best to utilize that situation or that conversation to the best of your ability. Lastly, about people, what I'll say is, when you're having those personal conversations, it's likely that the individual across from you is going to raise a question or a concern that you have not yet heard of, and they're going to illuminate what's important to them. It just makes sense to sort of take note of those kinds of things, because in future conversations that you have with this individual, whether it's about this policy or something else, indirectly related to the success of your policy at Summer Fling, you're then able to draw on that personal history, which is extremely beneficial in the long run. Always follow up and thank someone who has given you their time. Everyone is very busy, and if you take the time to express appreciation for that person having given up some to you, then you've presented yourself well, and it's just good form. All right, on we are to messaging. This is really very simple. All you need to do is take your policy and distill it into 1 or 2 key sentences, some key phrases that will roll nicely off the tongue, things that are easily recognizable and easily remembered. This is messaging. As I said, obviously those phrases will need to be directly related to your policy, otherwise there's no point in generating them, but you should find a way to distill what you're trying to achieve into a very condensed number of characters, almost like a tweet, so that you can in fact tweet it. And that's why we're moving on to the media component of how to lobby next. Messaging should also probably be more focused on what your policy will be achieving should it pass. It's generally results-based information, almost factoids about why your policy is superior. Okay, so on to social media. So using applications such as Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and other social media, you can begin a dialogue about your policy. And what you'll want to do is utilize the messaging that you've put together and post and discuss using that key messaging on Twitter and Facebook and other social media avenues to ignite this dialogue and promote it. Of course, you also always have the option of even creating a website for the express purpose of promoting your policy and perhaps providing any additional supplementary information that will go a long way toward convincing people that this is the policy to back at Summer Fling. I do want to point out that when using social media, be strategic in the way that you engage with other people. At the crux of social media is making connections and starting conversations with individuals. So it's one thing just to tweet out something about your policy. It's another to observe current conversations occurring around the subject of your policy that you may notice on Twitter as already occurring and chime in referencing your policy. That's how you interject yourself into an existing conversation and suddenly make your work in that policy realm relevant to those individuals. So you want to be engaging in existing conversations as well as igniting new ones and starting your own. Okay, now on to merchandise. There are individuals who may want to go the whole 9 yards with this deal. You have the option of creating stickers, pins, t-shirts even, and whatever other paraphernalia you can envision to promote your policy, whether it be at Summer Fling or even in an event that's taking place in a liberal environment before Summer Fling. Some of these things can be obtained at relatively low costs. It really depends on how far you're willing to go, how much funding and fundraising you're willing to put into this. Like I said, I mean, this is a spectrum of commitment, and some folks go right to the end and exhaust that spectrum, and some folks don't. It's not obligatory. It's not absolutely necessary to pursue something like this, but I did want to point out as an option. Okay, so moving on to teamwork. Now, this is a multifaceted area of lobbying, and it may sound like a phrase you heard come out of the mouth of a camp counselor once upon a time, but what I mean when I say teamwork in the context of lobbying for your policy is to work with those who are not necessarily wholly invested in getting their own policies passed, meaning they're not the sole authors on any particular policy. So these may be folks who you've reached out to previously and have already committed to you, or folks that are sort of undecided on who they're supporting come the big ballot day at Summer Fling. What you want to be doing is creating a database of individuals who you know are going to be working on your behalf to support your policy, whether it be through social media, when you can't be on social media, or debating in favor of your policy during those crucial debates. This is really going to be important when it comes to not only voting, but in momentum in lead up to voting during those debates. It's not only important to talk about your own policy, but it's important to have folks who are going to both support your policy and criticize when necessary policies you feel are weaker. Okay, last but not least, we have reached whipping the vote. Now, many of you have probably heard about the party whip. You can be your own whip in this particular situation. What I mean by whipping the vote at first is, to begin with, make sure that everybody you know who's already supporting your policy is in the room at the time of the vote. Make sure that they haven't skulked off or gone home early or were in the washroom at the time when the voting was taking place. Make sure everybody you know who is supporting you does actually vote. The next step beyond that is working with folks who are also trying to get policies passed at Summer Fling. It's not unheard of to work with them to pool their resources and their votes. I mean, this isn't normally discussed as a strategy, but the fact of the matter is it does happen. Authors on various policies will get together and pool their votes and pool their resources to ensure that both authors on two completely different policies are successful at Summer Fling because they have whipped votes from both of their respective regions, areas, or policy interest groups. That's why it's really important that if you do have a policy coming forward to Summer Fling, that you try and get as large of a contingency or a following as possible coming to Summer Fling with you, knowing that they're going to be supporting your policy, because that's going to give you a little bit of leverage in making some agreements with like-minded folks who are also trying to get their policies passed. Like I said, this isn't usually a strategy that we illuminate too clearly, but I think it's important that we talk about it because, as I said, it does go on, and it's important that everybody is aware, and it's important that everybody feels as though they have access to the same kinds of strategies. And so that is my goal in discussing whipping the vote with you. So we have reached the end of our how to lobby slide, and it's really the connection between each one of these steps and the intermingling of each one of these strategies that is ultimately going to contribute to your success at Summer Fling. Now, I would like to point out again that ultimately we hope it's the merit of the ideas on the paper that will sway votes on the floor. Absolutely, and we have to believe in that. But the reality of the situation is that people can be doing a lot more to raise awareness about the ideas coming forward to this conference before we end up at that moment. By engaging and utilizing some of these strategies, you're working to secure yourself a little bit more support before having to go in and make your presentation on the day of the conference. Okay, so we're going to move on to the next slide, which will just simply cover again why we're doing this. Why do we lobby? So follow me and let's go. Okay, so this was touched upon a little bit in the last few slides, but I just want to make it very clear. Why do we do this? Why will we waste so much time creating messaging, maybe even a website, maybe putting some pins together to lobby for a policy when we can just debate it and perhaps even wing it on the floor? That's an option. You can absolutely go for it. Perhaps you're a remarkably skilled public speaker, and that's perfectly fine. I've done it, many people have, and have been successful as a result. But if you were looking to secure yourself even more support on top of that, lobbying will allow you to generate a discourse about your issue before the open discussion. It's also another opportunity to have your ideas scrutinized before the major conference. So it's another chance to refine your ideas and potentially come up with answers to some of those tough objection questions before you're faced with them on the spot. The process will illuminate questions and issues that you haven't seen or that have not been raised before. And that's never a bad thing. In fact, that's always a good thing. To be more prepared is to be more equipped to ensure your own success. And that's really why we lobby. So we've reached the end of this slide, why lobby, and we're going to move on to the next slide, which just will cover some basic points to remember at Summer Fling. So follow me and let's go. Okay, so here are some basic things to remember when you actually reach Summer Fling. Continue to work throughout the weekend to engage your peers on your idea. There may have been plenty of folks that you didn't realize were going to be attending or that you have not yet reached out to, that you have an opportunity to speak to in person at the conference far before we actually vote. So take advantage of those hours and minutes before voting actually takes place to chat people up about your ideas. That's why we're there. That's why we attend Summer Fling, to talk about policy. The opportunity to sway your votes remain open right up until the ballot is in the box. So take advantage of the time. The other thing you might want to consider is not only just arriving and speaking on your own policy, but speak out during debate about other policies. If you recognize weaknesses in other policies, don't be afraid to illuminate those and point them out. That is ultimately going to help you going forward. It may seem silly, but if folks have become accustomed to your voice, if folks have become accustomed to the way in which you debate, you won't seem like such a new voice or such a new person when it comes time to address everyone when you present your own policy. All of these little things contribute to a larger character and a larger discourse around your ideas in your policy, in your policy debate style. So keep them in mind. And last but not least, be respectful, regardless of whether or not you agree with everyone's ideas, or if everyone agrees with your idea or ideas plural. Be respectful, polite throughout the entire process. Okay, so we're moving on to the last slide, and follow me. Let's go. All right, so good luck. We're going to be reaching Summer Fling very soon, and some things you may want to do before you arrive is just familiarize yourself with Robert's rules. You may find that the process is going to be a little less daunting on the day of if you have a sense of how motions are moved. And in fact, you can use Robert's rules to advance your own policy in some instances. And that's something that I encourage everybody to do. You can find guides to Robert's Rules of Order online just about anywhere. Just do a quick Google search and you will find plenty of information. And if this is your first time coming to Summer Fling and you're really excited about it, you may want to even practice debating with some of your policy wonk friends. That will prepare you for the process, and it'll give you an opportunity to exercise Robert's rules as well. And lastly, have fun up there. Have fun at Summer Fling. Have fun debating and enjoy it, because the policy process is a lot of fun and it should be an enjoyable experience, which is why the Ontario Young Liberals devote an entire weekend to this process. So I hope to see you all there and have a wonderful, wonderful policy journey. Take care. Bye-bye.